What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to count down my top 10 favorite movies of 2022. And I have to apologize, I'm a little bit under the weather, but I'll do my best to edit out any coughing, sneezing, or fluids coming out of my ears or nose or eyes or whatever the case might be. And I also have to admit that I've not yet seen every movie that I want to see. I'm seeing Babylon tomorrow, but then I'm skipping town on Friday. So this is my last chance to do this top 10 list. So if I love Babylon, my apologies to Babylon for not including it on this list. But before I go any further, let me just specify these are my favorites. My only consideration for this list is personal taste. If you have a movie that you love that's not on the list, just give it a shout out in the comments below, or better still, make your own list, turn it into a podcast, a blog post, a YouTube video, whatever. The movie business really benefits from people who are fired up and passionate, and I know a lot of times people like to talk about like toxic fandom and all this nonsense. I like angry, fired up movie fans. I can remember vividly back in college hanging out at parties where my friends who were totally shit-faced would be screaming at each other about minor discrepancies in how they chose to appreciate The Godfather. They were both admittedly huge fans, but they were screaming at each other nonetheless. So if you totally disagree with what I have to say, let me know. You will not bother me at all. But before I get into my honorable mentions in my list, I just want to make a few observations about the movie industry as I see it. There's no getting around the fact that 2022 was a kind of a funky year. I feel like movies are really struggling commercially and critically. However, I had no trouble putting together a top 10 list, and I had so many left over, I had no trouble putting together an honorable mentions list that had more than 10. I wouldn't say that there are a ton of movies that I was like, oh my God, these are the greatest movies I've ever seen, but there are a lot of movies that were pretty good, so I'm not going to have like too much doom and gloom about my predictions about the industry, but it is in a transition period. And any art form that's based on technology will always be in a process of reinventing itself. And if you're into film history, there are all these key points like the end of the silent era, or the introduction of television and widescreen cinematography, or the arrival of the movie brats and the new Hollywood in the late 60s and early 70s, where the industry is always changing. And I feel like the industry is due for some more changes coming our way. But here's one alarming stat that I heard the other day. I was listening to a podcast called The Ankler, which I strongly recommend. It's much more kind of business analysis as opposed to like a fan site. But apparently over the last year, 40% of specialty screens closed in America, which means all the films that are made for a couple $1 million are going to have fewer places where they can be shown unless they are able to be booked at like the AMCs and the Regals and that sort of thing. Which for me is a shame, because I do like being able to see movies that are not franchises or popcorn movies or roller coaster movies in the theater. A perfect example would be something like the Banshees of Inisherin, which I'll be talking about in my list. I feel like cinema needs to have movies for an adult sensibility play in the theater. But all hope is not lost. I mean, next year, Christopher Nolan is releasing Oppenheimer. There are no superheroes, there are no flying saucers, there are no dinosaurs. And so it helps if you have a giant track record like Christopher Nolan to keep adult movies alive in the multiplex. But obviously, they're going to continue to struggle, I think. My prediction is that in the years to come, the theater will increasingly be a place where you see premium movie experiences at a crazy high ticket price. IMAX, 70mm, IMAX 3D, Dolby, all those various formats. And I feel like increasingly any stories that are written and directed for adults that don't employ a lot of spectacle or special effects, you're going to see them on places like HBO and Netflix. And that's just the reality of the industry right now. Our media landscape is always changing, and who knows? In the years to come, there might be no theaters at all, or maybe they'll make a huge comeback. But people have predicted the death of cinema many times in the past, and they've always been wrong, but it will always be in a process like a phoenix of being reborn. Now, before I go any further, I should acknowledge that there are plenty of movies from 2022 that I've still not yet seen. I did not see Resurrection. I didn't see Vortex. I didn't see Marcel the Shell with Shoes On. I didn't see The Menu. I didn't see Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. But I did see a hell of a lot of new movies this year. So here are some of my honorable mentions that will not make the list. And as I mentioned before, I had more than 10 honorable mentions. This year had a very deep bench, but very few like dynamite standouts. But my honorable mentions include Triangle of Sadness, Nope, Men, Everything Everywhere All at Once, Funny Pages, X, Pleasure, All My Friends Hate Me, Bodies, 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 Bardo, Tar, The Northman, Mad God, Terrifier 2, and Avatar The Way of Water. I feel like if I just went with those movies for my top 10, that would have been totally fine for the purposes of this list. And there's one final honorable mention which I wanted to include in my top 10, but it didn't technically come out in 2022, although it came out in America in 2022. But in 2021, we saw the release of The Sadness in Taiwan, and it made its big splash in America this year, but it's one of the most hardcore, horrific horror movies in recent years. But because it came out in January of 2021 in its home country, I feel like I couldn't honestly include it in this list, but holy shit, it is a dynamite fucking horror movie. But let's go ahead and dive into my number 10 because I don't know how long my voice is going to last given my illness, but I'm going with Confess Fletch, and I have to thank my friends Nick Berry and Bill Scurry for recommending it. Somehow this movie was just off my radar. I think I'd heard that it was coming, and then I thought it was like a podcast or like an audiobook or something like that. But this is from Greg Mottola. I hope I'm saying that correctly. He directed a lot of episodes for shows like Arrested Development, as well as movies like Superbad and Adventureland. But this movie, it represents a little bit of a lost art form. A 98-minute comedy that's tightly constructed. It's light, it's effortless, it's more or less pretension-free, and it was just an amazing throwback to an era where we saw comedies coming out all the time. And it's not one of those movies that's going to have people rolling in the aisles, but it was one of those movies where I was just kind of giggling happily from start to finish. It was totally charming, had this great ensemble cast. John Hamm was absolutely fantastic, and all respect to Chevy Chase. I mean, obviously he got there first, but I wouldn't mind seeing several more of these, and I would prefer to see more of these Fletch movies than I would to see more Glass Onion movies. But my one knock on this movie is that we get to the very end of the flick, and then suddenly they insert this really annoying scene where it was almost like the filmmakers say, oh my God, it's 2022, and we forgot to insert a really annoying lecture into the movie. And suddenly they had this conversation about white privilege, and I was like, you realize it's like old white guys who like Fletch in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and now you're suddenly inserting this lecture that will probably alienate, at a minimum, a decent chunk. But once again, this is a classic example of Hollywood doing everything in their power to make people run away from the movie business. But that scene aside, I found the movie to be an absolute delight to watch. And I think I'm going to have to hunt down some of those original books that introduced the character back in the day. But let's move on to my number 9. And I must admit that it took me a long time to watch this movie. I thought it was going to be all hype in one of those stupid movies that a lot of people just decide or make up their minds to like. But I finally watched it on Netflix, and it just absolutely floored me. And I'm talking about RRR. From director S.S. Rajamouli, if I'm saying that correctly. How to describe this movie for people who have not seen it? It's a really satisfying crowd pleaser. It's a buddy movie. It's a big budget spectacle. It's a historical epic. It's got this high octane style and emotion. And what it really reminded me of was these big, glorious spectacles that Hollywood used to create back in the 30s and 40s, where the goal was just complete and total, pure, unbridled entertainment, where the style is just exuberant. Like a modern-day equivalent would be people like Sam Raimi or Peter Jackson or Robert Rodriguez, where it's a little bit over the top, but it's completely, totally revels in being totally divorced from reality. In a lot of ways, it's a lot like the Hong Kong cinema of the 80s and the early 90s when all those great classic movies were coming out. But holy crap, even with all the cheesy songs and the over-the-top melodrama, this is pure, raw cinema where you're telling the story in the most epic visual style possible, where it understands that some audience members just want the sheer decadent thrill of being overwhelmed by an aesthetic experience. It's an exercise in pure style. And this movie is well over 3 hours long, and it took me a little while to figure out whether or not I was going to be into it. But where it finally clicked was this epic bridge scene where I was just in heaven, and I hadn't seen any action like that was so imaginative and just so euphoric in any American movie all year. But I won't lie, you will feel the length. At one point I thought the movie was almost over, and I checked the running time, and I had like an hour and 50 minutes to go, and I was like, oh my God. So, but I will be back for the sequel, and I will definitely be seeing more of the director's earlier movies. And my only real negative against this is that the movie ends with this lengthy dance number that was so nauseating that it almost erased all the goodwill that the movie had created over the course of the film. But in the future, if I rewatch it, I'll just stop the movie before the final dance number, and then I'll be happy. But moving on to my number 8, Park Chan-wook's Decision to Leave. Now, for people who've been paying attention over the last 20 years, South Korea has gone through this true golden age of incredible film and television, and Park Chan-wook has been a huge part of that. I first got exposed to his work, I think in 2004 or 3. I think 4. I was at the Sundance Film Festival at a midnight screening of Old Boy, and he showed up and introduced it, and the crowd was kind of drunk and unruly, and it was just a fucking blast. It was one of the best movie-going experiences that I've ever had. And then in recent memory, he's made movies like The Handmaiden, which is one of the most intensely erotic movies of the last decade. Decision to Leave is quite different. It's almost like a Hitchcock film from the 50s, where it's this delightful murder mystery that begins with this dead body being found at the base of a cliff that leads into this mysterious love story. And actress Tang Wei, or Wei, I'm not sure how to say her last name. Basically, if you're not already in love with her, it's because you have not seen Decision to Leave. But I think this movie kind of got slept on because it didn't have all the outrageous qualities that a lot of Park Chan-wook movies have, earlier movies have, just the wild, explicit sex and violence that he's known for. But if you want to see him class it up and go with the more kind of, I guess, restrained style, Decision to Leave should absolutely be on your list. But let's get back to Hollywood with my number 7, The Batman from director Matt Reeves. This is the only superhero movie that I'm including on the list. I'm frankly kind of sick to death of the whole superhero experience, although I will be paying very close attention to what James Gunn does with the DC slate moving forward. But of all the audience experiences I had in 2022, this was the best, where I went to this theater here in New York that was totally packed. And it's the only time all year where I didn't have complaints about the audience. New York audience members tend to be very unruly, talking a lot, coming and going on their phones, just making a total spectacle of themselves. This movie had the entire audience in the palm of its hand. They were just like, just totally entranced. I remember at one point I stopped just to kind of look around, and everybody was just spellbound. And there's something about those early scenes with the voiceover narration and the Nirvana music, and that really dark, moody, atmospheric, stylish photography. It was a very special experience. It is too long, and I think the ending is really weak. The movie had no shortage of superheroes and supervillains, where you had Catwoman, the Riddler, Penguin, Batman. Like, why are they not having some epic battle with each other? Batman was essentially battling water at the end. I mean, it left me feeling like the movie didn't have a climax, and that was incredibly frustrating. So you have a long movie with a weak ending. I get why the movie didn't make over $1 billion, why it absolutely should have, but Colin Farrell was absolutely incredible. I mean, everybody was incredible in this. The ensemble cast was amazing, and it was the only superhero movie that really felt like a movie being made by an auteur director with a really specific flavor and style of filmmaking. And it's hard at this point to do a Batman movie where you show something that has not already been seen in previous movies from people like Tim Burton or Joel Schumacher or Christopher Nolan or Zack Snyder or whomever. But what I loved about this was it was the first time I really realized just how weird it is to have somebody like the Batman show up during a police investigation, where he just came across like such a lunatic, such a psychopath, kind of skulking around the room, looking for clues, chiming in as needed, just enduring the hostility of all the police officers. And then seeing him in the police station later on, that was something new. Just seeing his interactions with cops and just experiencing that hostility right face to face. And I think Robert Pattinson is rapidly earning a reputation as one of the most talented actors of his generation. He has incredible taste in directors that he chooses to work with. And I hope moving forward that Matt Reeves and James Gunn will find a way to work together as opposed to battling it out. But number 6, let's move on to the only concert film or documentary that's on this list, Moonage Daydream from director, hang on one sec, Brett Morgan. And I deliberately skipped this in the theater because I knew it was going to have a bunch of great concert footage and a bunch of great music, and I wanted to basically be able to be totally zonked out on mind-altering substances without anybody in the theater distracting me or annoying me or bothering me. And I was absolutely right. I got in the proper frame of mind, and like the first half of the movie has all this concert footage from the 70s, which is the closest I'll ever come to getting to see David Bowie in concert when he was really in his creative prime. But it's a damn good documentary. I love the way the film included all these clips from silent films or art house classics like 8½. And there's some really interesting observations by David Bowie. He was talking about how an artist, when they're a little bit out of their depth, as he expressed it, when your toes can't quite touch the bottom, that's when you might be able to do something interesting. And he had the most refreshing attitude just about life and art and creativity, how you have to try to pull things from life every day, but also give back to life every day as much as you can. And obviously, he's a singular artist who made a massive impact during the time he had on this planet. I strongly recommend people check out this documentary. But let's move into my top 5. And this, my number 5 might be my only controversial choice, but I'm going with Andrew Dominik's Blonde, starring the lovely Ana de Armas. And this is one of those movies that provoked a lot of really ignorant, stupid comments from a lot of people who ostensibly are supposed to be into cinema, but are clearly looking for something that this movie was not offering. But there's a whole generation of people out there now, or I guess a crop of people, I guess a subsection, where they seem to feel like any movie that upsets them or makes them feel bad is somehow a bad movie. And I have the opposite attitude. I feel like the world needs its cage rattled constantly. In an industry that only produces safe content for the entire family, that's not a scene that I want to be a part of. I feel like, I think I said this in my review, some movies need to be as thrilling and as exciting and as forbidden and sinful as like snorting a line of cocaine off somebody's bare ass. Like, not every movie is supposed to be escapism. Some movies are supposed to be, like I said, forbidden, naughty. And this movie was. And I think a lot of people who were freaking out about it totally were ignorant of the fact that this is based on a novel, not on history, based on a novel by Joyce Carol Oates. And she basically wrote a horror novel about sex in Hollywood. And I think most people who went to see this thought they were going to get to see some glistening biopic celebrating the life of Marilyn Monroe, or they wanted to see whatever they wanted to see, they didn't get at all. But for me, I saw precisely what I wanted to see, and that was a really provocative work of cinema that was dangerous and leaned right into risk and was incredibly erotic. And I hope Ana de Armas picks up some statues. I doubt she will. Most award shows are very nervous about controversial movies, so I think Blonde will get shut out, but I really enjoyed it. But as long as we're on the subject of controversial movies, let's get into my number 4, Crimes of the Future, from the legendary David Cronenberg. For me, David Cronenberg, he is the central figure of the last 50 years in the horror genre. I don't think anyone else comes close. He's a lot of friendly rivals, people like John Carpenter or Tobe Hooper or Wes Craven, but nobody has taken the horror genre to new terrain quite like David Cronenberg, because he doesn't come at the horror genre like a movie freak who's trying to pay homage to all the horror films that he loves. He comes from almost like a philosophical, medicinal, scientific background. And so he's always exploring terrain that we've never seen explored in any movies before. And I have to admit, I probably like this movie more for what it represents as opposed to the movie itself, because admittedly, it is a little inert and slow at times. But I do like how Viggo Mortensen and Léa Seydoux were quite literally willing to bear all and explore this really strange terrain that mixes art and erotica and dystopian futures and how we're going to evolve and how we're going to survive. So I probably give this flick a pass for too much in that it specifically appeals exactly to my tastes and interests. But I think this is David Cronenberg's most interesting movie that he's made since Crashed. I'm talking about the 1996 movie, not the idiotic flick from 2004. But yeah, of the last 25 years, David Cronenberg's made some good ones like Eastern Promises and History of Violence. But Crimes of the Future for me was a true return to form for the great David Cronenberg era of the past. And I loved it, and I strongly recommend it. But as long as we're on the subject of really disturbing horror films, let's talk about Bones and All, which is my number 3. So I was totally wrong about this movie. I thought it was going to be a massive hit because it's a love story starring Timothée Chalamet, but I probably should have taken into account the fact that most movies about cannibalism appealed to a limited audience at best. But I thought this movie was absolutely riveting, and Luca Guadagnino is rapidly becoming one of my favorite filmmakers working today. But what this movie reminded me of was a lot of classic films where you've got quote-unquote outlaws or killers on the run, which is always a great concept, whether you're talking about True Romance or Badlands or Bonnie and Clyde. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of these movies where you've got really dangerous people who are in love just traveling the country. But the cinematography was absolutely stunning. Basically, Hollywood tends to ignore flyover country, Elvis country, basically the entire massive land in America between New York and LA, and this movie just leaned all the way in on it. I thought actress Taylor Russell was an absolute revelation. It was some of the most natural, effortless, just astonishing acting that I've seen in so long. Mark Rylance was incredible, just so damn eerie, so damn creepy. And yeah, it's the best love story about cannibalism that'll probably ever get made. And I really enjoyed how the way they established like the rules of these cannibals and how their abilities evolve over time and their ability to smell each other and that sort of thing, and how they increasingly get hungrier and hungrier as time goes by. I was just astonished, and it went to some really dark places, especially the scenes with Chloe Sevigny, which I will not spoil here, but if you've not yet seen Bones and All, go do so. But number 2, this movie had to make the list. It was the biggest runaway sensation of 2022, and I'm talking about Top Gun motherfucking Maverick, starring Tom Cruise. Now, this movie delivered in every way, shape, or form that it possibly could in terms of the astonishing photography of actual jets doing actual shit in the sky with the camera in the cockpits. I mean, we're so accustomed now to seeing just pure green screen nonsense from Marvel, we've kind of forgotten the exhilaration and the excitement of an actual action scene. And this movie really pulled no punches on that front. It was so goddamn fun. But very wisely, this movie approached the Top Gun franchise in a way where people who liked Top Gun from 1986 would like this as well. It seems so obvious when you say it, but there's this new trend in Hollywood where they'll take an old existing IP, like a book or a comic or a video game or a movie or a show or whatever, and they'll say, well, we want all the old fans to watch this. However, the old content is toxic and the old fans are toxic, and you better sit down and accept a stern talking to before you watch this latest content. And I'm like, fuck you. You just lost half your audience. Like, I don't know where somebody thought it was a good idea to talk shit about the past films in a franchise and the people who like those films prior to relaunching a franchise. Well, Top Gun Maverick went in the opposite direction. They're like, look, if you love the old movie, you're going to love the new movie. We're going to lean into everything that made the original one great, but also take this franchise in a totally new direction. And it rapidly became Tom Cruise's most successful film that he's ever made. And just the other day, he posted this astonishing video online where he's skydiving and falling backwards out of a plane and thanking the audience, talking about what an honor it is to be able to entertain the audience. And I feel like there's so many assholes in showbiz who need to take a page from his book.
Where was I? Oh yeah, thank you for supporting Top Gun Maverick. As always, thank you for allowing us to entertain you. It truly is the honor of a lifetime.
But Tom Cruise seems to be one of the few actors and producers left who understands this is show business. It's entertainment. It's not show lectures. It's not show preachiness. Show business. Entertain the shit out of the audience to the best of your ability. And you can sneak in your worldview on the side. But first and foremost, deliver an incredible experience where somebody will find it worth their while to spend a couple hours out of their day to slap down cash and sit down in the theater and put all their distractions aside. So high five to Tom Cruise for reminding Hollywood what showbiz is all about. But at long last, we come to my number one, The Banshees of Inisherin. So The Banshees of Inisherin, from writer-director Martin McDonagh, it reunites Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson from their film In Bruges from about 15 years ago, which is an absolute bona fide cult classic. And this is one of those movies that is a true vanishing breed, where you've got a modestly budgeted film that actually sells tickets and does pretty well in the theater. And Colin Farrell just had an incredible year. Between this and The Batman, Colin Farrell is firing on all cylinders. But this movie has everything that most movies these days lack, where it's willing to go to the dark side. It's got a wicked, almost kind of nasty sense of humor.
Didn't you and he used to be the best of friends?
We're still the best of friends.
No, you're not.
Who says we're not?
Sit somewhere else.
There's not a single person in spandex in sight getting in fights, unless you count the self-inflicted violence of Brendan Gleeson's character as he starts chopping off his own fingers as a way of telling his former friend, "You're boring, I don't like you anymore, don't talk to me." And I mean, that was just so dark and so sinister, but I found myself cackling with glee throughout this because the humanity is so real and the script is so clever, and you have all these incredible performances from people like Barry Keoghan and Kerry Condon. Kerry Condon's just such an absolute angel. And the movie's photography just it absolutely casts a spell over the audience. It's gorgeous and melancholy and so sad and so moving. And I just felt just a complete, total like whirlwind, or just like a full landscape of different human emotions while watching this movie. And I hope it leads to Martin McDonagh becoming much more active as a filmmaker. Obviously, he likes to do double duty. He's a very famous playwright. First time I got exposed to him was through his play, A Behanding in Spokane. But goddamn, I imagine that A24 and HBO and Neon and all these other people are going to be lining up wanting to do his next movie, because at a time where the specialty market, formerly known as the independent market, is contracting and kind of going away, he's one of the few filmmakers left who has proven that he can still generate box office with a style that is totally uncompromising, that is totally true to his voice as an artist, and that is why it is my favorite movie of 2022. All right, well, in spite of my sickness, I managed to make it to the very end of this list. I hope you enjoyed what I had to offer, and any recommendations you want to make, by all means, include them in the comments below, or reach out to me on Twitter at Geeking Out. And also, just in terms of shows that I saw this year, a few shout-outs. Loved Irma Vep, loved House of the Dragon, loved Better Call Saul, loved The White Lotus, but my heart still belongs to cinema, even though obviously the world of streaming and miniseries and that sort of thing, it's all really thriving right now, and there's an embarrassment of riches in terms of the total options. I am a movie lover, and I hope that there will always be movies to discuss every year moving forward. But before I wrap up this video, let me bring you a word from Manscaped, the official sponsor of my podcast, Wrong Reel. It's never too early to play holiday music, and it's never too early to start thinking about gifts. Whether it's for a friend or the friends in your pants, you can make this a season to be jolly with Manscaped. Do your little drummer boy a favor and use the Lawnmower 4.0 to avoid another silent night in the bedroom. Then add in Manscaped's top-of-the-line shower products to have the people thinking, "All I want for Christmas is you," as Mariah Carey famously said. Santa cares about a sack, and so should you. So look nice when you get naughty by going to manscaped.com and using the discount code WRONGREEL in all caps for free shipping and 20% off. Inside, you'll find their Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer, Crop Preserver ball deodorant, Crop Reviver toner, Performance boxer briefs. Those are the best boxers to be sold or to be found anywhere in the world, and a travel bag to hold your goodies. Think of it as the perfect package for your package. So thank you to all of you out there who've been supporting this channel this year. I hope I've kept y'all entertained and informed to some degree, and I look forward to making a lot more videos in 2023. But if you enjoyed this video, consider liking the video, subscribing to the I can't even speak. Subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell. But I hope everybody has a very Merry Christmas, very happy holidays, all that good stuff. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.